Welcome back to the Pivot Point Equine Podcast. I'm Destri along with Becky Pearson. And last week we talked about preseason conditioning and getting back in shape after a long break. So today we're going to talk about recovery and the different components to that when you're getting sore from your workout or your rehab. And so what types of things do we need to do in order to recover? So Becky, what are some of the most important components to recovery that you would like to see with your patients and athletes?
The things that I use in my program and with my patients and my horses, you definitely want to do an active recovery. And you probably do that with your athletes as well after they've had a really hard workout and they're sore and they get what we call DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness. What we just want to do is lay down on the couch and do nothing and not move. Please don't ask me to move. Please don't ask me to move very fast. When you get that set in, we don't want to do anything, but it's really important that we do stay active. We don't have to keep pushing to the level that we did that got us sore in the first place, but we definitely need to have a lighter day, whether it's with ourselves or our horses. So where you're doing some light workout, yoga, Pilates, stretching, things like that. And with your horse, don't just put them in a stall. Make sure they are out. They're either doing some, they're in the pasture, they have some turnout, they have some light work if you don't have turnout as an option. So definitely needing more of an active recovery day, especially after a harder workout. What do you find with your athletes that you work with?
So we mainly base it on their level of activity. And I agree with you on having an active recovery because, especially with injuries, you're not going to recover from an injury by just resting. You're going to have to do something, whether it be stretching or strengthening or something like that. So, for instance, my wife, she just ran 2 days at a barrel race, both horses this weekend. And so, coming on Monday, it's more of just a rest day for those horses, for them to be turned out, doing their own thing. A lot of times you might use some sort of modalities, whether it be if you believe in magnet blankets or anything like that. Um, we use some stuff like that. The rest of it is how what we really preach to our athletes is we look at their sleep and their nutrition and then their activity. And I think those are the things, especially when you're on the road rodeoing or traveling a lot to games or anything else like that. The first things that get compromised are your sleep and your nutrition. So focusing on those two things, I feel are a very important part of the recovery process as well.
Amen. That's when you are in the heat of a season, whether it be an athletic event that doesn't involve a horse or with a horse. I know that I don't sleep well on the road, especially the first night. Usually, second night, I sleep a little bit better. Usually, my diet is out the window. And, you know, if we are not sleeping well, we're not eating well, we're not feeling well. And so you definitely need to focus on the four areas of recovery, move well. So, let's say you're driving to an event and it's quite a ways away. Let's say you're 8 hours at least in the pickup and you're stiff and sore. What's that also going to do to your horse? So we got to move well. And when we're on the road, that can be challenging. We have to sleep well, we have to eat well, and then we have to think well. So as we're talking about the first part of that, the move well, and you are conditioning and you are then on that recovery day, like you said, your wife, she ran 2 days. Now those horses are turned out. did she get sore? Is she doing some things to stretch herself today? Um, Stretching after workout, before workout, those are all good options for recovery, especially like, post recovery, or post workout, you get a much better stretch than you do pre workout. And, you get more effectiveness of that. But sometimes you just need to get up and stretch just to be able to move well that next day, for sure. What are your thoughts on those?
So definitely looking at, I think that we focus on our horses more than we do ourselves a lot. I think that's pretty typical of us as horsemen is we're probably going to take our horse to the vet, to the chiropractor, to the massage therapist to get the magna wave stuff done before we'll ever look at ourselves and help ourselves recover. And sure, my wife, she was having some soreness after running this weekend. So I worked on her, went through all the things that I know that she typically would have after coming off a weekend like that, addressed those, did some soft tissue work on her to help release some of the tight and sore muscles. And that's pretty typical of what I would do with my athletes as well. And so the more you work on people that you've been around a lot, the more you know right where to go with them. And so that's where being consistent with who you use is so important because, whether it's your horse or yourself, you use the same horse chiro or horse massage person or whatever, because the more they work on that horse, they're going to know where that horse is typically going to be sore and how they're supposed to be moving rather than going to somebody else who hasn't ever seen them. They might overlook something or just not understand that horse itself or yourself. And so the more I work on athletes I work in the high school setting mostly. So if I work on them from their freshman year to their senior year, I typically know their history, where they usually get hung up, and can address those areas fairly efficiently. Especially working on my wife, I work on her all the time. And so I know right where she's going to get stuck and what's going to be causing referral patterns and everything else on her.
I agree completely. There's something to be said for a history of knowing the history of that person, knowing the history of the animal, what they've been through, and then also noticing little changes, like for example, last night Gracie and I were riding together, and I thought her mare looked off a little bit, and so I had her just quit doing the maneuvers she was doing. Well, she looked fine. And Gracie was like, well, she feels fine. Well, then coming when she loped in the right lead, she didn't say anything right away. And she's like, well, she just feels off. And so very first thing we did with her is Gracie got off. And I said, well, let's get back to your stretching program that you've been doing with her. And then today we'll do more of an active recovery day for her. She's had, a few days of pretty solid workouts here. And so we'll take the day, I'll palpate her, I'll see where I think there's some new things going on. And that's one thing, like there's a debate, and I don't know if we've talked about this in another podcast, but there's a debate. Do you stretch before you work out, or do you stretch after you work out? And there's a lot of debate in the rehab world itself, and there's a school of thought that if you stretch that horse that before you work out or before you work them, you're getting a true picture of what's really going on with that animal. And I agree to that. You're going to find more stiffness and more it's going to be more blatant if you just pull them out of the stall or you pull them out of the pen or the pasture and you start stretching them and you're checking their range of motion. You're going to find those issues easier than if you wait until after you're done. Now, do you want more effectiveness with your stretching? And you'll probably agree with this, you'll get a better stretch after that muscle is warmed up and it's more like warm taffy instead of cold taffy. Warm taffy is going to stretch a whole lot better than cold stuff. So different schools of thought. If you're really wondering what's going on, then I would stretch beforehand. If you're wanting more effectiveness with the stretch, I would do it afterwards. And I feel like that goes for horses and people. What are your thoughts on that?
I think stretching is important in your warm up, but to me, it's all about how you stretch. You're not in your warm up, you're not going to be holding a prolonged stretch for longer than probably 3 to 5 seconds. And that's something that you go to the roping or the rodeo, and I'll just use calf ropers as an example because they seem to stretch just as much as, I mean, roughies stretch a lot, everything else like that. But the type of stretching where people are just holding it and not moving throughout the stretch, that's not preparing you for what you're about to do. You want to move throughout the range of motion in those stretches, get in them, hold them a few seconds, get back out, and create some mobility and warming that muscle up that way. And I'm not saying bounce through your stretches. I'm saying get in it, hold it for a second, get out of it. And then when you're looking at more of the recovery type stretching, probably hold it a little longer, 10 to 15, maybe 20 seconds, not going through as many reps. And it's all about how you stretch. It's just different how you stretch in a recovery mode versus a preparation mode.
I agree. And, I had a conversation with the vet about it one time. We were talking about stretching my horse ahead of time. And I told him, I said, I really feel like when I stretch my horse before I perform, so after I've warmed up, but before I go in the gate, I said, whether it's coincidence or not, but I usually did not have as good a run as when I would, not stretch. And so we were talking about the muscle fibers. We were talking about that slow long hold. Well, I was, instead of doing a dynamic warm up and exciting the muscle or getting it prepared for what it was doing, I was calming that muscle down. And so I was actually kind of being counterproductive to myself to stretch ahead of time. I mean, there's one thing, you can pick up their feet and clean them out and all that, but to really want to do that long prolonged stretch like you were talking about, we discussed that I was probably being a little counterproductive, because I was calming that muscle down, where I really just kind of needed more of a dynamic warm up, like my typical routine. And then if I wanted to prevent more muscle soreness, that kind of stuff, that slow, long hold should have been done after I competed. So I just think that's a really confusing for a lot of people, don't you think?
I agree. And there's a lot of misinformation out there that people say stretching is bad or whatever. Well, it's not. It's all about how you stretch again. And determining readiness for activity is something that is important as well. So, and you can tell that just by looking at your horse or looking at your patient that you're working on. And it's just like if you're going to identify a sick animal out in the pasture and they're hunched up, stiff moving, not moving well. It's almost that same with people. Their body language will tell you what kind of readiness they have for that workout, for that rehab session, and you'll kind of tailor it to how they're feeling in that way. So if somebody comes in and for some reason and they weren't like this the day before or the week before or whatever, and they're going to have good days and bad days throughout the rehab and training process. We all do. And so that's when you can kind of identify when you need to recover versus when you need to push through and keep going with your deal. So in the, like, say you're working out, you lift arms heavy one day, you're not going to lift arms the next day, probably. You're going to either lift legs or put a day in between. If you're a 3 day a week person and you're doing upper and lower, then you probably should have a rest day in between those days and to let your body recover and get ready for the next session and not burn yourself out before, so you can't if you're too sore from your workout to go practice and ride your horse, that's also counterproductive. You're going to have some of that in the beginning stages of your training program where you're working muscles you maybe haven't worked before, addressing some things you maybe haven't addressed before. But learning how to self-analyze your readiness, where you're at, what you can push through, what's pain, what's soreness from the workout, those are all things that a person needs to pay attention to as they go through things.
I agree. And we see it all the time in the clinic with patients as let's say they went through a surgery and we introduce a new activity, and they come back and, depending on the individual, I'll get some people they want to cancel their PT appointment because they're so sore. And, if they actually tell us that on the phone when they call to cancel, we can have an opportunity to say, hey, we can take a lighter day, we can back things off. At home, I just want you doing things more for range of motion today instead of us really working on the strength. We have to balance that strength and conditioning with the periods of recovery and taking it light. I had a rotator cuff repair patient. He's about 6 weeks post-op, so he's starting to lift his arm on his own now. He's an elderly gentleman and he's getting sore. So, what do? We back him off when he's at home and saying, just do these light range of motion things. And then we see how that, is he recovering? Is it more just muscle soreness versus is it joint pain, and more serious things? Usually after you back off for a couple of days, it helps you not only physically, but also mentally, because that mental fatigue of being in pain every day, being sore every day, I mean, that will make a coward out of all of us. When we are fatigued and stressed out and constant pain, none of us want to function when we're in that mode.
I agree. And having discipline to work through some of that as well. Like you said, when you're going through a post-op rehab and you're looking at months and months of recovery, it is hard to stay hooked up and realize that there is light at the end of the tunnel. Because when you get out of that surgery, it feels like they cut off your arm or your leg and gave you a new one. I mean, it's unrecognizable. You can't do simple things like put your pants on or put your shirt on or shower or anything like that. And it's very debilitating
Mm-hmm.
mentally to those patients. And so being able to set goals with them at the start and be like, all right, so phase one, we're going to hit this goal. And then once we hit that, we'll be ready to move on to phase two. Phase two is this. And I feel like that's very helpful for them to realize that so they have something to shoot for. And so as they go throughout that process, again, like you said, they're not going to feel perfect every day. Maybe they didn't get enough sleep before. Maybe their nutrition wasn't on point that day. Maybe their hydration isn't quite where it needs to be. And so being able to either one, be able to identify what activities can we modify so we can still get something out of this session, or do we need to focus more on me working on soft tissue release with you, getting you unrestricted and feeling better where you're tight and sore? Or do we need to, I mean, we have things like Normatex compression boots in the training room that we use compression therapy. We use cold therapy like the cold tubs or just like certain compression cold machines and elevation that we do in there for recovery. So is it one of those days where we just need to focus on that, get ourselves back to baseline so we're ready to continue?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's okay to take a day and give yourself some grace, especially after a major surgery. You probably went and observed some surgery in your education, and I know I've went in there and observed surgery, and it is like, for anybody that wonders, kind of what the surgeries are about, man, it is, orthopedic surgery is like carpentry in the body. I mean, it is It is no wonder that you have a lot of bruising afterwards. It is very, very, um, it's intimidating, honestly. When you're in there, the very first surgery I observed was a total hip replacement, and I was in high school, and I thought, wow, I couldn't believe the hammering that was taking place, to be able to get that rod in to that lady's femur. And it was just, and the amount of tissue that they have to cut and pull back in order to expose that joint to get in there. So, give yourself some grace, and it's okay to ask for help, which is, it's also very hard for people, especially I think in the Western industry. We are very independent people. We are used to doing things on our own and never had to ask for help. Whether we're farmers, ranchers, cowboys, cowgirls, we kind of pride ourselves in being very independent. And that is really hard for people to have help to put their pants on, to have help to put their shirt on. And it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to know that this is a temporary situation. And sometimes I'll have my patients do a bit of like a gratitude journal instead of focusing on, poor me, I went through this surgery, now I can't move my knee, I can't do this, I can't do that, and focusing on everything that they can't do. I like to have them, maybe they just appreciate that the sun is shining and it's a nice day. It might have to be so basic as that, or that they were able to get themselves up from a chair today and yesterday they couldn't. It sometimes takes really diving in and mentally helping them through probably one of the worst times of their life, for sure.
And you said it. I mean, in the Western industry, everybody's pretty independent, and also this is their livelihood. There's no missing work or anything else like that. The cows aren't going to feed themselves. And so that adds another layer of stress to this process. And when you're stressed out and wearing yourself out with your thoughts along with the physical aspect, you'll burn out pretty quick. And so trying to find ways to cope with that is very important as well. And going back to the nutrition part of it, I mean, I've had people that were seemingly either plateaued or behind in the rehab process. And then we look at, okay, are you getting enough protein? Are you getting enough carbs for energy? And we go to their nutrition plan and make a simple tweak. Now we're leaps and bounds ahead in a 2 to 4 week period than we were before that. And I know in my last surgery that I had on my knee, I was like, I got to get back as quick as possible. It was January. I want to be ready by the time May comes, so I'm ready to start roping. I got to get back to work and helping other people again. And so every advantage that I could give myself, that's what I tried to do. And then nutrition was a part of that. And so protein shakes after each workout and taking some BCAAs and hydration stuff to really make sure that my body could handle the load through the workout. Just different things like that to help give myself an edge to be able to recover quicker are important in that process, especially as you get older or go to the next level or whatever.
I agree. And I don't think people take it into consideration. And quite honestly, I'm glad you bring this up, because I probably don't talk to my patients about it enough in the recovery side of things. And, are you getting enough protein? And as we get older, a lot of my people, when they're recovering from a surgery, they actually put weight on, because what are you doing? You're sitting around the house, and because you can't do your normal stuff. So then they're eating, and they're probably eating garbage. And so I think that's a really good point as far as bringing up, what are you putting into your body nutritionally? And, I know that sometimes I can think of a few barrel racers that maybe they've sustained a fracture and they're afraid of gaining too much weight while they're healing up. So then they aren't eating enough, and like they're not taking in the calcium that they need. So then you're into, delayed healing from the fracture. They really need to assess what they're fueling their body with so they can feel that recovery for sure.
I agree. And there's certain vitamins that can help supplement some of that.
Mhm.
Like whenever I was going through my process, I took vitamin D, I would take calcium, vitamin E also, and just try to give myself an advantage. Zinc and magnesium are also good, especially to help with some of the stress of things. Magnesium is good. And so looking at some different options as far as supplementation, vitamins, especially as you get older and you don't process or absorb vitamins as well, or certain times a year that you're not getting enough vitamin D from being outside and stuff. Uh, I always supplement vitamin D, and I've noticed a huge difference, not just vitamin C through the cold and flu season, but vitamin D as well, because it's important for your respiratory health along with your bone health. And it seems more and more, and I'm not sure why this is, but in our athletes, we're seeing vitamin D type deficiencies and injuries from that, stress fractures, OCD lesions, and those different types of injuries that you would see them once in a while, but now we're seeing them consistently. And it's kind of a concern because we, these kids and ourselves, with what's in our foods and our water and stuff like that, the deck is kind of getting stacked against us a little bit. And so it gets harder and harder to take care of yourself. So being able to know what foods to intake, what not to intake, what foods cause inflammation, and what foods don't are another important part of this process. So you can maximize your healing. One interesting thing that my wife and I have found is celery juice, and the properties of that are there's a lot of anti-inflammatory properties and overall gut health, and that's important in your horse and you. We look at gut health all the time in our horses, and it's also important for you as well, in order for you to absorb things and recover correctly.
Hmm. So do you juice that yourself or do you buy that at a
No,
store?
we juice it fresh for you to have the maximum benefit from it. We juice it fresh, and we've got some of our friends on it that have had, like, especially chronic issues. They're dealing with chronic inflammatory issues or chronic body process type issues with their guts or whatever, and we juice it fresh, and you drink it at the beginning of the day, and it doesn't keep very long, and so that's why you kind of got to do it every day or every other day,
Mhm.
and man, I'll tell you, like it was quite an experience for me to wrap my head around celery juice like that. Just is gonna be nasty. Are you kidding? And but man, after a while, when your body gets something like that it needs, you'll almost start to crave it. It's kind of a weird thing to describe, but yeah, celery juice, try it.
Yeah, well, so you just take your couple sticks of celery and grind it up, and how much do you take? Like I have not heard of this, so I'm gonna ask the questions that say
Oh,
maybe
here we
else.
go. All right. All right. Well, gonna get a
Share
lot
your
out of this
recipe.
today. Here we go. So it's not complicated, but we get the big stalks of celery, and then we have a juicer, and so we'll cut them up, we'll wash them. We usually wash ours in vinegar and stuff, and make sure all the dirt's off them. You can leave the leaves on if you want and juice the leaves too, and there is benefits to that, but it makes it really bitter tasting if we leave the leaves in. So we usually cut the leaves off and just do the stalks, and the bottom part of the celery has more juice than the top part, but we do the whole deal anyway. But yeah, you run it through the juicer and it comes out, and then I've found that we'll strain it again, and then it's really smooth. It gets all the pulp out of it, and it goes down a lot better. So you don't have those little particles in it like you would like orange juice that's pulp free or whatever. Uh, it's the same type of deal. So it's not rocket science, thankfully, but it does take a little bit of preparation and work. So sometimes we'll cut and wash the celery, put it in the fridge, get it out the next day, juice it, and go on about our day.
Hmm. Good. Well, I'll have to check it out and I'll have to try it.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah. Does it count if your celery's in your Bloody Mary?
I wish. I, I wish. The thought counts, right? So
Yes.
it makes me feel better. And like we said last time, you can't you can't just rely on Advil and Butte and things like that to make everything better and go away. That's a temporary fix. You're more masking the problem than you are fixing it. Can it help you get through some of those days? Yes. And I will say, like, when they tell you to be on your pain meds when you're coming off the surgery, yes, be on your meds, take them religiously on whatever hour you're supposed to be taking them. Because if you don't, you fall off that wagon, boy, it's going to be miserable for you. So yes, there is a place for it, but at a certain point, you're just masking the pain and you're not fixing the problem. Whether that's Advil, Pendleton, whatever you're using, it's not going to be a long-term fix for you.
Yeah. And, I tell people, because they'll come in after surgery and they'll say, should I stop taking these pain meds? I don't like what they do. And I'll tell them, I said, as long as we can accomplish what we need to in therapy, without you taking them, then we're okay. But I said, if you're in so much pain and misery that you can't sleep, you can't do the things that we need to do to get your range of motion back here in therapy, then you still need them. And so, it's really, I always tell them, to take it as prescribed by your doctor. And when you're feeling really good and you feel like you don't need them, then start weaning off during the day, but keep them on board for at night so that you can get a good night's sleep and not be, all wrung out when they come into therapy. So yes, there is a time and a place for pain meds, for ibuprofen, for whatever, but ideally we want to be pain free, drug free, and living our best life without the need for anything else. But it sometimes takes a process and it takes a team, and I think that's where we have to be good with talking to our doctor, we have to be good with talking to our trainer, we have to be good talking to our physical therapist, or whatever your team is, that, and sometimes it's even just somebody to talk through the mental side of things as well. So, don't be afraid to ask people for their opinion on, when's the right time to do this or that. So,
And you said it having a community to rely on throughout this process. I know that one of the things that I try to provide in my practice is having a network of people that I can refer to, whether it be a doctor, physical therapist, chiropractor, massage therapist, nutritionist, things like that. It's very important to be able to refer those things out that aren't necessarily your expertise or whatever. So um, and also just communicating what you're feeling, whether it be mentally or physically, is very important. And I don't even mind talking to the parents, especially as because it's taxing on them watching their child go through this. And the worst part of this job is telling somebody that they can't do something for an extended period of time and holding them out. I know when I was competing, the worst thing you could tell me was I can't rodeo or I can't rope, and I would just go crazy. I'm like, what am I going to do? They almost lose their identity a little bit because that's who they are and that's what they do. And so as I go through my career, it seems that I do just as much of the mental type stuff as I do the physical anymore, and encouraging them and setting goals with them and letting them know this is normal. This pain is normal here. This is how we're going to address it. This is what we're working towards. And once we get there, then we can move on to this. And just being there for them, letting them know that there is a plan and talking them off the cliff a little bit is a big part of our job. And even when say we're evaluating somebody who is healthy and just trying to take their game to the next level. And this is something that has been harder when I've been working with people that are ages from 30 to 50. And they come in and they have a laundry list of things that they have had in their lifetime, whether it be injuries or issues that they either have or have not dealt with. That population can be challenging in that way. And so it's important, and I'm not always perfect at this, but letting them know that instead of telling them, well, this is really messed up and this is screwed up and this and that, and making them think like, oh my God, I'm a wreck. Um, I mean, there is things that I'm like, whoa, this needs some work, right? But and I need to get better about it. But I think letting them know, like, okay, so this is what I'm seeing here, and trying to present it in a more constructive manner of, okay, so here's where we could improve, and then when we improve this, it'll do this for us in a better, so you'll be able to do this activity better when we improve, say, your hip internal rotation or your spine mobility or whatever. And then you'll have less pain, and just kind of present it in a constructive, more positive manner rather than, um, wow, this is really messed up. And holy cow, I don't know how you lived for this long with this like this. I mean, there is some stuff I look at, I'm like, oh, good Lord. But I need to be better about it. So I think that's also important, how you talk to your patients, and then just listening to them. And I know that if I let a patient tell me what is wrong with them, then I have more success at fixing them. And if I kind of get hung up, I'll have them go through it again and try to pick up on something else that I might have missed before. And so they will tell you where it's hurting and how to fix it if you listen to them. If you don't know how, it's important to have a network of somebody that may be able to do what you can.
Amen. Yeah, I think those are all good points. And I think that we can have a whole nother podcast on the mental side of things. So I think we should take a break here. And I think next week's episode is going to dive into the mental side of recovery. What do you think?
And that sounds good. It definitely will fill up some time doing that. So thank you everybody for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
All right. You got a tagline for today?
The tagline for today is, again, your health is not a destination, it's a way of life.
I love it. Thanks, everybody.